Good evening, everyone. It's calling the meeting to order. This is the meeting of the Santa Monica Audit Subcommittee on Thursday, February 27th, 2025, and the time is 6:04. So we can stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So can the clerk make the announcement on the convener?
Well, actually, let me call the roll first.
Oh, okay.
Committee Member Hall,
Here.
Committee Member Snell,
Here.
Committee Member Zerskaya,
Here.
Vice Chair Bush,
Present.
Chair Virgo.
Here.
Okay, and will any committee members be recusing themselves pursuant to the Levine Act this evening? Hearing none, actually no, let's do public input first. So there'll be no general public input tonight as this is a special meeting, so we'll move on to item 2, public input for special agenda items and consent calendar only. And so we don't have any speakers for that item. So we'll now move on to the special agenda items, but Chair Virgo, did you have agenda management?
Yeah, I'd like to suggest some agenda management. This agenda is, as I look at it, is kind of interrelated with the last agenda. There's a bunch of interlocking items. And so what I would like to propose is that we move the vote for the chair, the new chair and the vice chair after, as the last item, so that the agenda can be kind of closed out with basically my background of what happened in the last meeting. And then from there, the new chair can take over and move, and we can move the process forward. It's just that it just seems to be kind of complicated, given that the interrelationship with the prior meeting and some of the items here. So I would move that we just move the vote for the new chair and the new vice chair to the end of the meeting rather than up front of the meeting. Do I have a second for that?
I'll second that. I'll second that.
Can we have a voice vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Let's do a roll call vote.
Okay, let's do a roll call.
Committee Member Hall,
No.
Committee Member Snell,
No.
Committee Member Zerskaya,
No.
Vice Chair Bush,
Yes.
Chair Virgo.
Yes.
Motion fails.
Motion fails, okay.
Great, so then we'll now move on to item 3, special agenda items, committee member chair or vote for committee chair and vice chair, and I will now open the floor for nominations.
I'd like to nominate Councilmember Committee Member Snell for chair and Councilmember Committee Member Zernskaya for vice chair.
Any other nominations?
I would like to nominate the resident Jeff Bush for chair, and Councilmember Hall for vice chair.
Okay, so we have one option is Snell and Zernskaya, and the other option is Bush and Hall. So I will now call the roll, and just let me know what option you prefer. Committee Member Hall,
Snell Zernskaya.
Committee Member Snell,
No, Zerkaya.
Committee Member Zernskaya,
Snell, Zernskaya.
Vice Chair Bush,
Bush and Hall.
and Chair Virgo.
Bush and Hall.
Congratulations, Chair Snell and Chair, Vice Chair Zernskaya. If you want to switch seats, please.
Switch seats.
Or not, it's not that.
Yeah, we don't need to do that.
Okay.
That's not
We'll do it the next meeting.
Yeah.
Okay,
All
so
right.
we'll now move on to the consent calendar. All items will be considered and approved in one motion unless removed by a member for discussion.
Excuse me, don't we have to do the swearing in first?
No, you don't need to be sworn in because you're a council member.
Okay.
So we have approval of the November 19th, 2024 minutes.
May I have a motion?
I'll move approval of the November 19th minutes.
Second.
We can do a voice vote.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Passes.
I will now move on to public input on remaining agenda items, and we have one person speaking on 2 items, Denise Barton. You may begin.
Good evening. For item 4, the Moss Adams Human Services Grant Program review. It contains many of the same issues the previous ones have found, such as employees complaining that the reporting process is too intensive. But that's what you get when you hire DEI instead of on their own. I would hope getting rid of the DEI Division of Exclusion and Indoctrination Department within the city would make the funds available for a CPA firm to conduct certain aspects of the fiscal monitoring, as well as the technical assistance which is said to be needed. But what am I saying? The city council is determined to be co-leaders. And if the human services grant recipients are still unable to produce all documents, receipts, or samples, that's a big red flag. And Moss Adams brushed that off as there's no minimal risk that unsubstantiated, unallowable costs may be found in the expenditures paid for by the city if 100% deep dive and review is concerned, which is very concerning regarding their standards as well. Or they say, put whatever you want, no one's going to check. In ending the city's DI hiring policies may also be the reason for the high turnover rate in this department, which requires a lot of emotional patience and training, as well as employees who complain about their workloads and everyday businesses are usually fired, not catered to as the city does, making the saying that city employees do as little as they can to earn as much as they can more and more true. Next, for item 6, capital asset internal control testing. Under timelines of recording assets, it again found delays in asset reporting and recording, that the average delay was 278 days, when best practices require that capital assets additions are to be properly tagged upon receipt and added to a centralized tracking system listing to encourage accurate financial reporting and proper safeguarding and accountability of assets. Will the delayed reporting assets be because city employers are using the resources for personal use and paying them back later? Either way, it does not make you look like good stewards of public funds. Then the Moss Adams plan obtained all supporting documents related to the most recent capital assets physical inventory that was performed. However, upon request, the documentation was not available because a complete city-wide asset count had not been performed in the last 2 years due to COVID. Here I have to wonder, bringing city staff back to City Hall would be the best thing, due to being a more structured environment for them to complete their work tasks and try to catch up on the ones they're still behind on. And I personally think city staff needs to make themselves more available to the residents. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now move on to item 6A, 2024 financial audit update.
Here we have the staff report.
Hi, I'm Ray Michelle, Financial Reporting. I have a very brief report, and then I'll hand it over to Ryan Domino, our external auditor. The 23-24 financial statements, they were just issued yesterday. We got an unmodified opinion, which means it's the statements are present fairly and are free from present fairly in all material aspects. We submitted for the GFOA award, and we've received that 40 times, so we expect to receive it again. A brief overview, the city uses separate funds to track its finances. So you can think of each separate fund as kind of like a checkbook. There are 3 basic types of funds. There are governmental funds, which use a modified accrual basis of accounting. So it's very short-term asset expenditure, revenue expenditure type accounting. So typically it will be what are called non-exchange transactions, so taxes, and then expenditures which occur quickly either during the year or accrue and paid very quickly after year end. Then there are what are called enterprise funds. Enterprise funds attempt to charge a fee to recover costs. So that would be something like the water fund or the triple R fund. And again, trying to charge a fee to recover a cost. Those types of funds use full accrual accounting. And then we have what are called internal service funds. So these are funds that provide services to other city funds. So we have like a vehicle fund, a self-insurance fund, of which one type is like a workers' comp self-insurance fund. And so the only customers for those funds are, in fact, other city funds. The financial statements are opined upon, and we opine, or the auditors opine on what are called major funds. Major funds are the largest funds or the most material funds in the city. So one of the major funds is always the general fund, and that's where most of the city's transactions are recorded. So those are the types where like property tax, sales tax, TOT, all those types of revenues come in. And so that's where police, fire, library, most of the city services exist in those funds. There's also what are called special revenue funds, and special revenue funds are where the revenues that come into the fund are somehow restricted by whoever gave us the funds in the first place. Then we've got another major fund is the low moderate income housing asset fund, and that fund was created by the redevelopment dissolution, and it's required to have its own separate audit and be opined upon, so that's why that's a major fund. And then we also have the Measure GS fund. That's a brand new fund. Again, the legislation to put the fund into place requires that it be opined upon separately and have a separate audit. And as far as the major funds in the enterprise fund categories, we got water, wastewater, airport, resource recovery, recycling, Big Blue Bus, and airport. The financial statement highlights, total net position, which is total assets minus total liabilities, is about 1.453 billion. That had a small increase from the previous year. The general fund balance increased to 174.6 million from 152 million. And that was primarily because we received some insurance settlements from some of our carriers related to PAL cases. And also we were able to bill some back business license and taxes and collect on those. The pension liability rose from 496 million to 504 million. The slight increase was due to a less than expected return on the plan assets. Long-term debt was about 319 million, which is about 8 million less than the previous year. And that was primarily due to just debt service payments. And then I'm going to turn this over to Ryan Domino, who's our outside auditor, to talk about the audit itself. And then we'll be both available to answer questions after his presentation.
His name is Ryan.
Dominic. Ryan, are you there? Ryan, are you there? You're on mute, Ryan.
There he is.
Ryan, can you hear us?
Ryan, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
There you go.
Hello.
All right.
Ooh, a little bit of a sound quality thing there.
You may proceed, Ryan.
Okay, wow, there's a feedback loop or something. Okay, let me share my screen real quick and I'll go through my presentation. Hopefully you can see my screen. Yep.
All right, very good. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me. And yeah, there is quite a bit of feedback there. It's a little unfortunate. So yeah, I'll go through my presentation real quick. LSL, once again, has been engaged by the city to perform a financial audit in accordance with the professional standards of government auditing standards and generally accepted auditing standards. So as a reminder, generally accepted auditing standards is kind of the bare minimum that auditors and all professions follow, whereas government auditing standards is a higher level of audit that requires us to not only audit the numbers, but evaluate internal controls and test compliance above and beyond the basic standards. So just a little bit about what internal controls we look at for our audits and get a little background information on what we do. As a reminder, so management of all of our auditees, including the city of Santa Monica, is responsible for the design and implementation of internal controls. Whereas me as the auditor, I'm responsible for gaining an understanding of what those controls are and evaluating whether they are designed and implemented properly for the purposes of performing a risk assessment and identifying audit procedures to respond to that risk assessment. I am not auditing the internal controls themselves, and our audit opinion letter does not actually express an opinion on whether or not they are designed effectively. So what our process is at LSL to evaluate internal controls, kind of figured I'd break it down for everybody, is we read the written policies and procedures that are in place. We conduct interviews with city staff about their responsibilities and job processes for significant transaction cycles. And we perform what's called a walkthrough. The walkthrough is a very limited sample size of some transactions for a particular transaction cycle. And what we do is we just make sure that what we're reading in the policies and what city staff are telling us that they're doing to follow controls is actually being done. As a firm, it is not our practice to rely on internal controls for our clients. Essentially what that means is we don't do a large enough sample size during the walkthrough phase for us to reduce the amount of testing that we do each year. So we just look at the controls to figure out what we're going to test more of at year end, but we don't test enough controls so that way we reduce our samples at the final audit, essentially. The other thing I'd like to talk about is materiality and these things. So as a reminder, we conduct our audit to render an opinion on whether or not the financial statements are materially correct. We would not be able to test 100% of transactions. It would take us years to even get through a single audit. Materiality is really defined as an amount or circumstance which would change the conclusion or decision of a user of the financial statements. So, for example, it could be as large as $1 million for huge organizations, or it could be as small as $1 if that $1 is the difference between staying in compliance with a bond and not staying in compliance with a bond. Our materiality calculations and thresholds are following industry accepted calculations for our quantitative materiality amounts, and every opinion unit or major fund of the city has its own materiality. And these thresholds are not shared with city staff to ensure that there is a level of unpredictability to our office. Also, when we are determining what the basis of materiality is, we try to consider the users of the financial statements and figure out what financial statement element, whether it's assets or expenditures or revenues, what might be most important to them. So, for example, most city councils are closely scrutinized budgetary spending. So, when we consider them as the primary user, expenditures often become the basis, although other items may be as well. So, the scope of our engagement, we did interim in April of last year, where we evaluated controls, provided feedback, and did our risk assessment, and really planned our year-end audit, which took place in November of last year, basically throughout that month. And that's where we dove into the details of the transactions and the balances, tested compliance, laws, regulations, and grant agreements, and performed all the procedures necessary to render an opinion. So the results of the audit is we did render an unmodified auditor's opinion on the financial statements, meaning it's a clean report. The financial statements are accurate and reliable as of June 30, 2024. We also issued our companion letter required by government auditing standards, the report on internal control and compliance, wherein we identified no significant deficiencies, material weaknesses, as well as no non-compliance as part of our compliance testing. Additionally, just a few other items, we identified no going concern doubt, so we did not identify any severe financial hardship that could potentially impact the city within the next 12 months. We identified no fraud, waste, or abuse as part of our procedures. We did not have any disagreement with management regarding the application of accounting principles. We had no difficulty conducting our audits. Management was very cooperative and provided us all the information we needed. And we also determined that the estimates used by management, primarily the pension and other post-employment benefits liabilities, the underlying data was reasonable and made sense. So that is the summary of the audit. I'm happy to take questions if you have any.
Are there any questions from any committee members? Yes, go right ahead.
Yes, good evening. Should I be looking at the screen, by the way, or
Yeah.
may I ask the question?
Question from Member Bush?
All right, let's start with the mic on. Okay, great. Actually, Randy, maybe a couple of these should go to you. I'm looking at the 14-page email. This is Oscar's email to the Audit Subcommittee. I'm assuming you're part of the package that we have here. And I had just a couple of things I wanted to check on. On page 7, you noted that there's 106.3 million of assigned fund balance, and then you listed various ways that those funds might be used. And I was just wondering, what is the relative magnitude of some of the things that you've listed in that paragraph? Is there one or two items there that constitute most of the 106.3 million, or is it more evenly distributed across all the items you've listed?
I'm sorry, I don't have the email in front of me, but I can look at the statement.
It's actually in the packages,
Thank you.
agenda package. In fact, get you a page reference here. Let's see. So it looks like that's page 25 of 72
Okay,
in the agenda.
I don't have that in front of me, but you're talking about just the general fund?
Yes.
Okay, well, that makes sense because only the general fund has assigned fund balance. If you look at page 88 of the financial statements,
I'm just going to make a note of this.
well, here.
I don't.
This is easy.
It's like 6 things open.
That's what we had.
Oh, great. Okay.
So those are the assigned fund balance categories?
Okay. Oh, and I see. So it's
Yes.
readily obvious.
Yes.
Which, so it looks like
Now,
other.
compensated absences is actually quite a large portion of it.
Okay. It looks like other purposes is also a fairly good size.
Right.
Piece of business. Okay. All right. I'll look at this and
Okay.
finally follow up. I can get back.
Super.
Any other?
I just had a couple more, so I'm going to run through these real quickly. And I was just wondering, on page 8 of 14, which I guess would be 26 of 72, are you able to say whether we're on track to hit that 15% number? This 15% number has to do with replenishing the rainy day fund.
That was
So
the
we're
Oscar
currently,
question.
as of the end of June 30th, 2024, we're at 13.5% of where we should be. We are, every year we're gonna increase that by 0.5% till we reach the 50% again.
Okay, couple more here. I'm going to jump to page 10 of 14, which is 28 of 72. I noticed the phrase negative unrestricted net position is used. Can you, I'm just not familiar with the terminology, can you explain what that term means?
Okay, so net position, the general term net position is assets minus liabilities. That's what you would normally think of as equity, but government doesn't really have equity because it has no shareholders, that sort of thing. So so this is going to be in governmental activities, probably what you're referring to?
Right.
Right,
That's
so
exactly right.
because there are certain restricted amounts in that net position, that has to be subtracted away from the entire amount that's in that position. And so the reason it's negative is primarily the net pension liability is greater than, essentially we don't have enough assets on the balance sheet to cover that net pension liability.
Okay.
But that's only in the governmental activities, not in the business type activities. And that's, if you look at almost every financial statement nowadays, it's going to look like that.
Okay, one item I thought that was tied to, maybe it isn't, is I know in the past financial cycle, we had to borrow money from some other funds. Is that associated with, where does that show up? Or do we have to pay those monies back? In other words, there was monies that came out of other funds
Right.
and were put into the general fund to satisfy some obligations.
Right, now don't confuse governmental activities with the general fund. So general fund accounting is on the fund level. So again, as I kind of mentioned, you have modified accrual accounting that works with the general fund, you have full accrual accounting that works on the governmental activities. So are you referring to the governmental activities or the general fund?
There was money that was borrowed from other funds, like the Housing Trust Fund, for
Correct.
example.
Correct.
And that's what I was referring to.
So that was actually recorded as a transfer into the general fund. And the reason it's recorded that way is in order to increase the fund balance or the assets minus liabilities of the general fund, it's recorded as basically revenue. And so that amount will eventually, once the city's on firmer financial ground, will be replenished or reimbursed to these funds that it in theory borrowed it from, but really it was a transfer in.
Okay, but for purposes of these statements, it doesn't need to show up as an obligation to be paid back.
At the fund level, it's not going to show up as an obligation.
All right.
But there will be something on the balance sheet with respect to
No, so because it was what's called a transfer in. It's basically one fund gave another fund some money.
Exactly.
So that's not a loan. That is
Pure
recorded as
transfer.
revenue into the general fund.
Okay.
The governmental, CTA came from private industry. It was like, what? How governmental accounting works, it's almost like your checkbook. So think about home mortgage. Once the money came into your checkbook, I got it to spend. And then, I bought my house. So then the money goes out to pay for your house. Expenditure.
So we don't have to show a corresponding contending liability with respect to it?
Not to the transfer, but we do, the way we document the
Yeah.
payment is that we put it in our financial policy in the budget book. So we actually have a payment plan as part of our financial policy where we indicate, based on these conditions, general fund will start paying back the funds.
Okay.
Basically, just reimburse them for the money that
Right.
was
Just
borrowed.
right.
Right,
What
but
does that show? What is the document where that would show
That
up?
is, it was adopted by council in October of 2023, I believe. One of the meetings, I'll send you the link to that.
Okay.
But there's an actual policy that we have where it actually explains the payment plan and all the conditions that need to be met before we start paying back.
Gotcha.
One of the conditions is growing our contingency reserve back to the 50% and maintaining that level and also capital at a certain level before we begin paying. So there's kind of like it walks us through the things that are more critical to the city before we begin paying back the other funds.
Okay, great. So
But they are documented.
Follow up by email on that.
Okay, before you leave that, there's one question that comes to my mind. Doesn't it depend on the nature of the funds? For example, could you do this kind of loan with the Measure GS fund that is legally restricted as what it can do? Or can you do that with any fund? Or would for example, with the GS fund, these have to be recognized as an actual liability rather than just an informal transfer? I mean, it's dependent upon the legal restrictions of the fund.
The
is it
legal
not?
restrictions of the fund, exactly. Yeah,
if I may. So it's the legal restriction of where the money came from. So in the case of the housing monies, council committed those monies they by just saying that we say these monies should go to this purpose. Restrictions come from a third party. So for instance, when we borrow bond, when
Right.
we float debt. So we say to the bondholders, we're going to spend this money on this particular thing. We cannot deviate from that because there's this third party restriction. Or we get grant money. The grantor says, oh, you need to spend it on this specific type of thing. So we cannot deviate from that. Whereas the housing money that was in theory transferred or borrowed, whatever you want to call it, that money was just committed by council. Council could uncommit that and commit it to something
In other
else.
words, that's really general fund money that the council has the discretion over committing it to different uses, but it also has the discretion to bring it back into the general fund if it wants.
Correct.
Right, so.
a few more on a different topic. Okay, anything else on this topic?
No,
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm now looking at page 29 of 72 and the unfunded pension liability. And I know we've gone round and round.
Oh,
on this,
you know,
but-
ask as many,
Okay.
the more times we talk
I
about
just
it.
have a simple question. Given that we're on the 20-year plan,
Mhm.
does this problem correct itself if we do nothing else at the end of 20 years?
So as CalPERS has certain assumptions.
Before you get into that,
Oh,
does
sure.
everybody know that the city's on a 20-year plan? Does everyone know that? Right, so maybe you want to just give a high-level overview
Oh,
as to
absolutely.
as to what the city has, how they're managing this, and why the city is not concerned about this.
Okay, so let me back it up a little bit further. So when our unfunded pension liability is about $500 million. How that number comes about is we have the gross liability, which is about 2.3 million, and we have about 1.8
Billions.
billion dollars worth of assets at CalPERS. So the 2.3 million less the 1.8 million gives you the 500 million. And that's why you keep on seeing the unfunded liability go up and down so much. So a couple of years ago when we had big COVID market boom, the returns were over 20%. So 20% of 1.8 billion, it's up a couple $100 million. So therefore the unfunded liability went down a couple $100 million. The very next year we lost 6.1%. So the unfunded liability went back up to about 400 and some odd million where it was 2 years before. So what happens is every time there's a so-called difference between what was expected and what actually occurred, CalPERS calls that a base. And it takes that base either over or under and amortizes that over 20 years. And so what our pension payment is made up of is what's called the normal cost, and that's the cost of everybody that's on staff, what they earned during that year. And then we also amortize that unfunded liability. So that $500 million unfunded liability, that gets amortized over a 20-year period.
That 20-year period is the maximum period that you can.
Excuse me, Mr. Verville, if you're gonna speak, I need your microphone on so that I can pick up the recording.
So that 20-year period is the maximum that CalPERS offers, is that correct?
That's the normal CalPERS period. You can create a shorter period if you wish. In fact, there was a pension committee that was put together by the city manager that consisted of both city staff and residents. And they came to the conclusion that we should be on a 13-year amortization schedule. And we made the first payment for under that 13-year assumption. And then COVID hit and then other financial issues occurred. So right now that's on pause.
There's a CalPERS website that has these options on there.
Yes.
So the difference between, we could be on a 5-year plan, so the city is incurring $172 million of additional interest expense by choosing the longest amortization period.
I guess you could also say by not paying earlier.
Same thing, yes.
And then from an audit standpoint, reporting for that has changed over the last year and a half too. Now don't we have to reflect that difference differently on our balance sheet from prior years?
The actual unfunded liability?
Well, we want to show that,
Right.
but my understanding is that there have been new reporting requirements with pensions that we have to reflect on our balance sheet.
I'm not aware of those.
That's, okay. That was my understanding, that there was just new reporting from there.
Well, if you get the information, go ahead and
Okay.
send it to Oscar, and then we can address that.
Two last comments on
Sure.
this. There's a lot of people outside of this room that see a big number, like the unfunded pension liability, and don't really understand what it is or what are the implications. And I just want to call everybody's attention to the paragraph. The paragraph is on page 30 of 72, and it starts with the word generally. And I think that's well written, and I think it does a nice job of summarizing this discussion. So I just wanted to point out that paragraph. I'm gonna just quickly move on to two other things. I saw a note, the note was 16B on page 92 of the financial statements. This has to do with
You
potential.
got my financial statements.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. This has to do with potential liability, and I just have
Oh, okay.
a quick question in there. In the notes, it says there were 234 plaintiffs, and there was $229.8 million settled.
Right.
So that was in the notes. And then it says there's 24 cases, or 153 plaintiffs are active. And I know we can't discuss that further.
Right.
But it also had something in there about 129 additional plaintiffs settled. So my question is the reference to the 129 additional plaintiffs included in the 234?
Yes.
Okay, good. It just wasn't clear. I'm sorry, did somebody else say anything? Okay, okay, all right, and then the last thing, I was just wondering if somebody could explain a paragraph. The paragraph was actually written by LSL, and let me try to give you a page reference. This would be page 33 of 72. And maybe it's because I don't have the background, but it's a paragraph. It's a paragraph that starts out, "In planning and performing our
Can I have personal privilege? Chair, I'm having a hard time hearing Committee Member Bush when a member of the public approaches the dais.
Thank you. All right, go ahead, Mr. Wood.
Okay, I'm sorry, I just was wondering if the gentleman from LSL could explain the paragraph on page 33 of 72. It starts out in planning and performing our audit. I just didn't understand it. It's probably because I just don't have the background.
Not a problem, I can certainly explain that. So essentially what that paragraph is saying is that we developed an understanding of the policies, procedures, and internal controls that the city has in place to generate the numbers in the annual comprehensive financial report. So when we developed that understanding, essentially what we did was we planned and performed audit procedures to respond to any sort of, how those controls are laid out, so to speak. What this paragraph is saying is that that was the entire purpose of our testing for internal controls, is just figuring out where we need to focus our time and effort and not render an opinion on the effectiveness of internal controls. So essentially it's like a little bit of a disclaimer paragraph. It's just saying we did internal control testing only for this purpose and not to render an opinion.
Okay, I just wanted to ask the chair if that's clear to you that I've done.
It is.
Okay.
Are there any other questions for me? Mark?
Yeah, I have a few questions. On the rainy day fund, it's, if I understand this correctly, it's 13.5% of the annual expenditures of the general fund, is that correct?
Yeah, that would be an Oscar
That is
question.
Okay,
So we take, so for example, for 13-14, we looked at what our expenditures are for 24-25. We adjust things that are related to revenues because we don't account for those as part of the expenditures. And then we include operating expenses and capital expenses.
well, what do you mean you adjust for
So
revenues?
measure GSH, for example.
Right,
We can budget for expenses, but if the revenues don't come at the same level, then we don't pay it out. Right? So we kind of back out for that, and then we apply the 13.5%.
okay, and so that changes every year.
It changes every year depending on how much how big our budget is for the future year.
Okay,
Which is why we do it for a future year, because if the budget grows, that percentage amount is bigger.
so there was a staff report on the January 28th council meeting that went through a litany of financial issues that the city's facing. Unprecedented liabilities, backlog of infrastructure, extraordinarily competitive labor market, the general fund and reserve levels, facing more claims, California Voters' Rights Act is coming back, lifeguard services, and the city is gonna enter negotiations with 11 bargaining units. So it was like this fire hose of issues that are coming down the pike. Then how does that influence your setting of what that percentage should be?
So that percentage is based on our fiscal policy. If we had more revenues to set aside, then it would be up to council to tell us we want to increase that maybe contingency. These things that we call out are every year when we develop the budget, the things that we need to account for as we look at our forecast and how much revenues are coming in. When we don't have sufficient revenues, then we have to balance between programming funds for the capital program, or cutting back on programs and all this stuff. So we kind of go through that based on what is the urgent need at that moment. If we were to get settlement rates, for example, that would be something that we have to prioritize and find the money for. That's one example. Council decides, for example, to invest in other things that we don't have funding for, and that's when we get into discussions about trade-offs and what
Right.
services we trade off.
A question for LSL. When they were considering the internal controls, is it Donna? Right? Oh, there it is. My glasses. When you were considering the internal controls, do you have access and did you look at all of the Moss Adams reports that have been done that documented internal controls on different areas? The one that comes to mind immediately is the capital project that they did, but I think they did a couple others. And how did that, if at all, influence how you look at internal controls?
I apologize, the audio quality is very. Was that a question for me?
Yes. You want me to repeat it?
Okay, I apologize, the audio quality is very poor, I could not understand the question.
Everyone needs to have their microphones off except the person who's speaking.
Right. Okay, so is this better? No.
Still very hard to understand.
Randy, use your microphone.
I don't feel it. Is there a switch? Do I have a switch?
Okay.
Is this better now? Can you hear, is it clear? No, he's shaking his head.
No, I'm very sorry.
Can we turn on captions or something so that it could be,
Right.
yeah. I don't know if that's
Okay.
a possibility on Teams.
Okay, I tried turning on the captions.
Let me try it one more time. Can you hear me better now? Yeah.
Oh, nothing's coming up.
Again, I'm still unclear because while there was a lot of discussion of internal controls, at the end of the day, the city's financial statements are, and your opinion on those are based on a substantive audit, not on a controls audit. Exactly. So the idea of looking at the internal controls, again, I'm not sure how much that plays into and how much reliance there can, or how robust a statement can be made about the city's internal controls because they're not part of rendering an opinion on the city's financial statements. So I'm still kind of confused about that, number one. And number two, the other question I had was, when you even looked at the internal controls, to the extent that you did you have access to and did you go through the Moss Adams reports that talked about internal controls?
Okay, I understand the question might be about internal control. Again, I apologize, the transcription is not working, and I cannot understand the question. If you would like, I can disconnect and try to reconnect here.
Can we potentially just call him and
I can,
We could do that. You can call into the chamber's phone, as soon as I,
We call them.
yeah, let me type the, phone number to,
We can call, you can call them, and we can call you.
If he calls in,
he can call into chambers. I'll give him the number. He can call into
can
chambers.
that be run through the system?
Yeah, it's gonna run, yeah.
Perfect, then let's just do that.
This would
we try to call in number.
Otherwise, I'm gonna file a complaint. They'll be a lawsuit. I don't wanna have trouble. Okay, thanks. Huh? Yeah, they actually all the time. Okay. They can make it this time.
Okay.
Where are they based out of? LSL?
Well, LSL, their office is in Irvine, but Ryan lives in Texas.
Oh,
You know, there's a question I can answer.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, can you hear us?
Yes, significantly better, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so the question was, it was a two-part question. It's about internal controls.
Yeah.
It's basically your opinion is based on a substantive audit, and it's not based on the city's internal controls. But there was a lot of discussion about that you guys looked at the internal controls. So I'm still kind of fuzzy as to what role, if any, the city's internal controls play in how you look at, or how you come to your audit conclusion, number one. And number two, when you did look at the internal controls, to the extent that you did, did you have access to and reference the Moss Adams internal control reports that have been issued to date? And the one that comes to my mind is the capital report, but I think they've done a couple others that touch on internal controls. And if you did look at those, do they play any role in the way you look at internal controls?
Okay, so I'll answer the first part of your question first. So the extent, to your point, we do perform a substantive audit. So essentially, when we hold policies and procedures and controls that are in place, we only do that to identify areas that we might need to spend more time. So, for example, the goal is to look at the policies, and if we see a policy that might need shoring up, it essentially means that we are going to spend more time, have larger sample sizes on that particular transaction cycle when we do the audit itself. If we were to come across something that was, a significant deficiency in internal control, for example, like somebody, as we're looking at the controls and we see that somebody is able to review and approve their own expense reports or something like that, we would obviously write that up as a significant issue. If it's other issues, there might be things that are called control deficiencies that come up. If they are minor, we bring them up to management, we talk about them, but we don't write them up as findings unless when we examine the numbers at the end of the day, there's an issue there. If it's a significant thing, regardless of whether or not there's an issue with the numbers, we would report on it. So
that's kind of the first one. We only use internal control, testing to figure out where we need to spend our time and to plan our risk assessments. To the second part of your question, we do not, as a firm, it's not really our policy to rely on the work of internal auditors. So although we do get the reports from Moss Adams throughout the year, and we do take a look at them to see if there is anything that could significantly impact our audit procedures, we don't rely on their work or make reference to it, but we do read the reports that are made available to us to see if there's anything that we need to spend extra time on. So hope that answers your questions there.
That answers the question, thank you.
Yep.
I'll return to that, I think it's in one other agenda item. A question I have is for Randy or for you. There is on page. So on page 7, and it says net change in fund balances, total government funds, and it's a positive $53 million. My question is, how do I find out? Is there any place that shows what the general fund component of that is? It's page 7. It's right in the financials, correct. It's reconciliation of government fund statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balances.
So you want to know what?
So my question is, this appears to be all the government funds, but is there any way to disaggregate that between the general fund and the other funds?
Oh yeah, I'll look on page 6 of the financial. I don't know if you have. Do you have the financial statements?
I have page 6.
Oh yeah, it'll be on page 6. So if you go to the far right, there's the 53 million, and then if you go across, it'll show you again each of the major funds, and then all
that's an obvious one. That's an embarrassing question.
non-major funds combined. And if you look at the back of the supplementary information, that's where the non-major funds are.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
The statements are voluminous and hard to read.
I'm going to ding myself on that. Second question on that page 7. It says grant revenue previously recognized in the statement of activities is recorded as revenue in the fund statements. Is that a misclassification issue or is that just a classification issue? What exactly does that mean?
That's the difference between modified accrual accounting and full accrual accounting. So under modified accrual accounting, if you do not receive the revenue within 60 days of year end, you cannot recognize it as revenue, and it's called unearned revenue. In full accrual accounting, it doesn't matter when you receive the funds. As long as the revenue can be recognized, it's earned, then you can recognize that revenue. So what's happening is we're having to reconcile the difference between modified accrual and full accrual accounting.
So is this negative 10 million, is that simply putting it into unearned revenue? Is that what you're doing?
Hang on, that's page 7?
Page 7.
Hang on a sec. It's on the reconciliations. That is reducing revenue because the revenue had been already recognized in the previous year.
So it's reducing revenue.
Right.
Got it. So it's a prior year. Recognition. Okay.
Because in the prior year it was recognized in the full accrual method of accounting, but it's recognized under the modified accrual in the current year.
Okay. Got it. There's one thing that struck me as I went through the management letter is that it talks about where how the revenues are, what the outlook is for increasing revenues, but it doesn't talk about the outlook for the city's cost structure, which was summarized in that other staff report. I'm just wondering, it seems to me we're focusing on revenues, but we don't have the same picture on cost in that discussion. Is that something that, should be considered as we go forward, to try and make this a more comprehensive statement?
We could definitely consider that. Yeah, that's something we can consider, for sure.
Because and the other thing that struck me when I looked at this was that the increases in revenues are primarily from increases in tax rates. They're not increases in transactions flowing through our tax rates. So, when we think about the fragility of our revenue streams, there's probably some theoretical limit as to, what that marginal, you're gonna have a declining marginal return on increasing tax rates. And everything in here about improving revenues is about increasing tax rates, and none of it is really about increasing the business, because the funny thing is, Santa Monica's tax rates are the highest amongst, most cities, so therefore, any incremental transaction volume through the city's process disproportionately, produces revenue. So that was, to me, was the kind of the one of the interesting takeaways. The other thing is, the business license taxes are gonna generate $3 million, for the city's general fund, but like my little hobby horse, you're gonna be losing $3 million from the surplus parking lots. So this is gonna be a net, you're probably gonna break even on this at best. It's kind of an interesting, so, I mean.
Revenues though for the business license come from corporate taxes.
No, what I'm saying is, you're projecting $3 million of improvement, but as you're surplusing parking lots, you're taking out $3 million. So net, as we look at this, that's what I'm saying on the cost side, even on the revenue side, there are other actions that are could be negating some of this. So as we put this together and try and put the picture together, it's something to think about, right?
But with the parking revenue, also, with the loss of that, you also don't reflect the reduction in expenses that would be attributed to
the drops in park, because we also pay a portion for the parking services that
exactly.
are related to the revenues being generated for transactions.
And what's your margin on the?
I don't have a margin, I don't have a number now, but that's what we can.
But it should be a pretty large margin, right?
It is.
Yeah, pretty much. Okay. Those were my key points on these financials.
Any other committee member questions? Go right ahead.
Yeah, the one thing you're to point out, Mark, is when we look at our rate studies, we also look at supply and demand for parking. And so right now, that's one thing that our Department of Transportation is going through. They're doing an analysis of that and what parking is there. And those reports we use to determine whether we, recommend for council, that a parking lot can be closed or not. So there is a study that does that.
Because with that study, with that study, I mean, even though the parking structure was closing, that doesn't mean that the revenue from parking moved over to other parking, right?
It moves to
Other parking.
Yeah, but I think the real big picture thing though that would be missing is to the extent that, to do a parking study when business is at its nadir, right? And then taking offline permanently revenue generating assets, because they're not only revenue generating directly for the city, but you have businesses that would be dependent upon that. So to the extent that you're trying to engineer a commercial recovery, it's hard, doing a parking study when you're probably operating at 50% of capacity, right, of transaction capacity and visitor capacity, or maybe even less than that, maybe 35%, and then saying, well, we're obviously you're going to be, excess parking in that situation. But to the extent that all of a sudden, you're able to engineer a revival of the commercial side of things, then all of a sudden, permanently taking these structures offline then starts capping your ability to capture that upside. And I think that's a critical thing when we're looking at parking structures and we're looking at needed capacity. One thing that's never being done here is trying to envision, look, what does a recovery scenario look like? You know, what kind of traffic does that, I mean, because, you know, the city is still, using DTSM reports, you know, it was still something like 70% of the non-international traveler, transactions are coming from people who are driving in. So, so I think that's the danger is that what you can't see you're not managing, and that's really the huge upside. You know, as I mentioned in the council meeting earlier, you know, you've got 245 acres of world-class beach, you've got a Mediterranean climate, you've got a potentially world-class shopping district, a world-class outdoor dining district in recovery. You've got a pier that is world-renowned and branded, and you've got potentially a world-class music, you know, live venue, right? And if that was actually managed as a portfolio, a programmed portfolio of assets, I mean, I can't imagine cities in the country or in the world that would die to have that kind of asset portfolio within maybe a 1.5 mile, 2 mile radius, and not being a destination. And if you think about that as a destination, right, and it's firing on all cylinders, all of a sudden, then you start thinking about what kind of parking do I need when all of this stuff is firing on all cylinders, right? Especially with all the residential housing development that's happening, the need for revenues for the city, you know, is skyrocketing, right? And it's about really thinking ahead about that kind of thing. So I would just caution, you know, when we talk about parking studies and, you know, are we underparked or overparked? The question is, what's the context of that?
So they look at various scenarios. They're looking at the full capacity and the, you know, just medium capacity scenarios. So we're not just looking at activity that's happening now. We actually do some assumptions and do other stuff. It's done by consultants, not done by the city. These are
right, but I mean, what's critical is the assumptions that the city gives the consultants, right? My guess is the consultants don't give you the assumptions.
The consultants tell us what assumptions we should consider to use. Right? So they say, you know, they look at our assets. They'll look at, you know, should we make an assumption of 50% capacity, 30% capacity, or 80% capacity? If at 80, do we have enough parking to meet that demand?
You know, for example, let's say the Civic Center was revitalized, right? Most of the parking has been used for sports fields. So I can imagine, you know, electric buses going in between, you know, downtown parking capacity and taking people to that kind of venue or that kind of scenario, right? So I'm not an expert in that, but it's just, right? But it's just that it's when you take stuff permanently offline, you're permanently cutting off that upside, right? If most of that transactional value is being driven by people who have to drive in and park somewhere. So anyways.
I totally get that, but the reality of it is also, when you look at a parking study, you also want to look at the capacity of the lots of all our lots. And you have to take that into consideration also. And our parking lot structure, and actually we just got our last council meeting, shows that the lots are not at full capacity. Actually, the average is like 30% capacity.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Which meant that, so when your assumptions that you're taking into consideration, when you get full capacity, you would have to take into consideration of those parking lots that have been
correct. Absolutely correct.
utilized.
Yeah, absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct.
Sorry, may I also?
Sure.
Thank you for bringing
Yeah.
forward those concerns, Committee Member Verville. I hear the concerns about taking parking offline that may be providing revenues and, you know, what the end result of that. To that point though, this only considers, I believe that you're only speaking about the city-owned parking lots. Is that accurate to say?
Mm-hmm.
So there are also private parking structures in downtown. There are, I believe, 10,000 off-street parking spots in downtown Santa Monica, not all of which are owned by the city. And the ones that are in the private parking lots, actually, please correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Santiago, would actually bring us more revenue because of Measure K, because we increased the tax on private parking lots and private parking. So that loss of revenue may be made up for, and obviously I don't have the numbers in front of me, but just thinking through that.
No, I appreciate that, but I'm thinking about handling visitor traffic in a highly successful upside, right? That's what I'm talking about. And so maybe the private parking can handle it. Maybe the cost of the private parking would dissuade people from coming in, and maybe the city's parking. I mean, the thing is, there's no replacement for a systematic kind of envisioning of what success looks like and working backwards from that, right? And saying, you know, how much, if the venues were all firing all cylinders, if they were basically all being programmed in an interrelated manner to maximize their revenue generating capacity, then what does that look like? I mean, if in fact the promenade was lined with restaurants, if we had, the Santa Monica Place as it was in 2016 or something, right? I mean, I saw a photo on one of the annual reports of a thriving downtown type of thing. We got back to that. What kind of capacity do we need? So all I'm saying is these parking studies taken, when business is just, crawling, it's just to me a very kind of high risk thing, because if we're trying to generate revenues for all of the requirements that we have to service in the future that we can that are coming into view, it's a big decision. I don't want to beat this up to it.
Can I have a quick comment?
Sure.
So when parking structure 3 was slated to be torn down, parking structure 6 was built with an additional 300 spaces to cover the loss of parking structure 3. And then I read the report, I read the parking study for parking structure 3, and they did go back pre-COVID to look at what potential parking would be. And the second thing, with the Civic Auditorium, we knew we were going to get rid of that flat lot. So that's why that structure was built next door.
Right, but again, if you're managing all of these amazing city assets, on a portfolio basis, the question is, what does that pull in? Is that enough parking? Is it still overparked? I don't know, and the other thing is, for example, on PS1, there was no discussion in the staff report that perhaps what you can do is, if you basically securitize the revenues coming off of that, you could actually pay for the seismic retrofit and still have money left over, right? And so therefore, wouldn't it be, getting rid of it, you're losing $1.1 million a year. You're still keeping $300,000 if you're financing it. So, but that option wasn't discussed. So, and there's just so many things that go into how to look at the capacity and how to think about preserving it's all about preserving the city's options to generate cash, right? That's if I had to summarize kind of when I read this, where I come out, it's like, what actions maximize the city's ability to generate cash? Because when you look into the future, you just see a massive requirement, coming like a tsunami, and it's like, these kinds of decisions take on added weight, when you look at that. So, but I appreciate what you're saying. But anyways, I'm done with that topic. Thank you. Sorry.
No, did you have more questions?
No, I'm done.
Okay. Let me actually pull up my notes here. So I only have hopefully 4 questions. In the agenda packet on page 22 of the PDF, which is noted as page 4 of 14, it says that it should be noted that the CalPERS portfolio posted a gain of 9.3% for the year ending June 30th, 2024, which is more than the expected rate of return of 6.8%. So the unfunded actuarial liability is expected to decrease slightly in the fiscal year 24-25 annual comprehensive financial report.
Right.
And another part of it, it said that it was like 5.3 or 5.8%. Could you just clarify? Am I misunderstanding the dates of
Oh, no,
what's
not
when?
at all. The issue that arises, which you're actually pointing out, which is great, is that the 6/30/24 unfunded liability, it won't be reported until the 24-25 statements. CalPERS cannot produce the actuarial reports in time to coincide with the current year. So what we're reporting in the 6/30/2024 statements is actually the 6/30/23 unfunded liability.
Okay, so
The 9.3?
9.3.
Yes, the 9.3%, that will be reported in next year's statements. So we're gonna see, assuming everything else is the same, we're gonna see that $500 million go down a little bit.
Okay, got it.
It has to do with timing. It's, they call it a measurement date and then financial statement date. And measurement date is 1 year behind.
I'll add something to that. When we prepare our mid-year budget, we take the latest report and project that. And then if we know that there was earnings that exceeded the amount that we reported at the time with our valuation reports, we adjust our projections based on that to kind of even them out, knowing that there was losses, but there were also gains in the future year. And that's what informs our forecast.
Got it. Thank you for the clarification.
Sure.
And then going to page 26 of the PDF, which is page 8 of 14 on the bottom. With regards to the unassigned fund balance for the general fund, it notes that there was $5.7 million in unrealized loss on investments. So I was just wondering if you'd be able to expand on that a little bit.
So primarily, if I may, the city invests in fixed income. So if we buy something today that pays 2%, or rather, I'm sorry, if we bought something a year ago that pays 2% and the interest rates go up to 4%, we have an unrealized loss on that investment that we bought at 2%.
Got it. So sorry, go ahead. Please go.
But the city almost always holds any investment to maturity. So no loss is typically realized on any of our investments. But GAAP requires us to show lower of cost or market. So because market is now lower than cost, we have to write the investments down to that amount.
Got it. Okay, so it's book value versus
Cost.
valuation, like cost of basis
cost
versus
versus market.
valuation. Okay.
Right.
So there's not. It's just because we can't reinvest those assets into something that has a higher yield at this time because we bought it when the interest rates were lower.
Right.
And because the standard practice is to hold it to maturity.
Correct.
That just shows it as an unrealized loss at this time. But
Right.
it's not actually going to be realized, or is it?
It won't be realized if we don't typically hold everything to maturity.
Okay.
So if we hold everything to maturity, there would be no recognized loss.
Okay.
But the GAAP rules require us to record things at lower cost or market. So since market's going to be lower than cost, we have to have that unrealized loss.
The joys of valuation
I'll add something
procedures.
to that. So monthly we submit monthly investment reports to council, and we explain that too, like what is the market to book value,
Yeah.
and we kind of talk about that too.
And also, sorry, geeky tidbit,
No,
that amount has actually been getting smaller and smaller because before, when
Interest rates
interest rates really
going
went
back
up and we're getting 1%, there was a huge unrealized loss. And now that's gotten smaller and smaller as things have matured, and then we've now invested in new securities at a higher interest rate.
On average, how frequently do some of our assets mature? Like, is it like 2%, 5% every year, or does it just depend?
It depends. Right now, we were holding a lot on short investments because the interest rates are so high, right? And so, we have it so that it ladders. So we have some that are maturing that we can reinvest at a better rate, and we kind of do that. Now that we have our contract with the investment advisors, we're going to do even a better job at that and managing investments.
Yeah, and I was very happy to see that because I also saw that it was saving us some money on
Systems.
on software. I'm trying to manage it because I know it's not necessarily what y'all need to do.
No.
Okay, so another thing I noticed, so this is at bottom of that page. It talks about our bond ratings, and I was just a little bit confused about some of our bond ratings appear to be AAA, and some of them are AA plus to AA. I know that there's different rating agencies. I know that I understand they're for different types of bonds, but I was wondering if you could just clarify that a little bit, please.
Sure. The city can typically either issue general obligation bonds. So in the case of when we built the main library, we issued a general obligation bond. And those are the bonds that you have to vote on, because what you're essentially doing is saying, I'm going to agree to be taxed a little bit more so I can go ahead and pay for the library. And then we would have what are called lease revenue bonds. And typically that's a transaction that occurs between the public financing authority of the city and the city itself. So in a way, it's sort of kind of a circuitous finance. And what that does is it takes, actually the library is a good example now because it's free and clear. We say, okay, the city's going to lease the library from the public financing authority, and it's going to make these lease payments. And so that, of course, is going to be a theoretically higher risk for an investor to invest in as opposed to the general obligation bond. Because the general obligation bond has that steady payment stream. Since the lease revenue bond is based on this lease payment being made, which of course winds up in the budget, so it's going to get paid, but that rating went down, I think, half a notch?
Yeah, one notch.
One notch. The rating agency was highlighting the fact that, yes, that we're still in good financial shape, but we still have sort of this unknown with the litigation.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why we got the downgrade.
Okay,
But
so
for general obligation, we're AAA. Now, the different rating agencies don't all have AAA,
yeah,
so that's why.
I have a little.
I have this chart on my desk.
Oh, me too. I
yes.
have it on next to my desk at home. I'm sorry. I'm also a little bit of a finance nerd. Okay, so our general obligation bond rating
Still AAA.
is still AAA.
Yes.
We've maintained that for a long
The
time.
entire time I've been here, which is 2000, I think I started in 2002.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and way before that too.
Yeah, so, okay, and it's just our revenue bonds that are being impacted, so those could
Correct.
hypothetically go up once we have some more, clarity on what the future obligations are going to be.
Right.
So one of the factors that when I spoke to S&P, what they mentioned is, as we start increasing our reserves again, then they'll reassess that, right?
Okay, good, yeah, because I know that we want to be able to get the lowest interest rates, when we go out to the bond market, so, okay, cool. So that was all my questions, thank you very much.
Sure.
Are there any other questions? Yes, go ahead.
I forgot one.
Sure.
So on page 4 of the measured GS cash and investments number, is that pre or post distribution to the 10 million that goes every year to the school district? How do you interpret that number?
It's less than 10 million from the previous year. Unfortunately, and I'm not sure why this is, but the measured GS year is not the same as the city's fiscal year.
Oh, it is.
Really?
It's March through February.
So there's gonna be a timing difference.
Right. So we made the payment for the March 24 GS year,
Right.
but we've accrued the payment because we already got $10 million within that time period. We accrued at year end that $10 million payment that'll be made next month. Next month.
So does that include the accrual? Is this gross or net
Yes.
of that accrual?
Well, that's cash. Cash accrual would be like accounts payable or accrued liability.
Okay, all right. So this is just the cash.
Correct.
The post whatever payments have been made.
The previous two.
Right.
Any other questions from any committee member? Well, seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the 2024 financial audit?
I'd like to move to receive and file. I believe that's
I second that.
Second.
They can't take action unless
Okay,
approval of the
and
chair.
we had a second on that.
They can't take
Can I
action.
get a voice
This vote
vote?
is null and void.
All in favor?
Aye.
This vote is, no, Mark has to be in charge.
And it was moved by Zuniga
Oh,
and
yeah.
seconded
Yeah.
by committee member Burbo.
Sorry if you didn't get that. Thank
No,
you.
it's okay.
You got it. All right, let's move on to the audit, internal audit status report, item B.
Excuse me, we just have a bit of housekeeping. It's come to my attention that the the audit subcommittee rules for the election of the chair and the vice chair are supposed to take place at the first regularly scheduled meeting, and this is a special meeting. Historically, The prior rules allowed for the election of the chair and the vice chair at the first calendar meeting, but the rules were amended recently. So I would recommend that we make a motion to reconsider and the election of the chair and vice chair that was done in item 3, and table that until the next regularly scheduled meeting in compliance with the rules.
Okay, this is a special, so moved. Any questions? All
I'll second.
in favor?
Second.
Aye.
Okay.
Question, when did those rules change?
Yes.
2023. Yeah, so for the remainder of the meeting, it'll be Chair Verbal and Vice Chair Bush.
Fine.
I would also recommend that you guys just have another vote, just ratifying the actions that were taken prior to this correction, just out of an abundance of caution.
I move that we, the committee ratifies all the votes that have been taken up till now in this meeting.
And I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? No. Okay. So, that takes us to, item 6B, the internal audit status report, with Moss Adams, and there's a staff presentation.
Colleen,
Colleen?
Okay. Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen really quickly so you can see our status report. We have one project in progress right now, which is a cash handling internal controls testing project where we're doing some targeted review of internal controls around cash handling in certain departments, and we've been working across the city to understand the cash handling environment and then develop those testing procedures. At our last meeting, I noted we had gotten started with this project early. We have had some schedule delays as a result of city staff being focused on other items, including the audit and the city emergency. And so we'll probably be on track for the original plan delivery of this at our next audit committee meeting. Our other work just involves supporting the city if there are questions or other things coming up with respect to the internal audit function. I'm happy to answer any questions you might all have tonight.
I have a question next. Mark, the chair.
Vice Chair Bush.
Okay,
Yes.
so I'm not sure, should we be asking questions of this document? And this document that I'm looking at begins on page 40 of 72, or is that part of a different section of the agenda?
This is. This would be the time to ask them that. This is the internal audit section. The rest of this is much more focused.
Okay, so I'll take that as a yes.
Yes.
Okay, are you able to see the same package that I'm seeing? It's page 40 of 72 of the agenda.
Yeah, it looks to me like that is related to the findings and recommendations tracking.
Right, okay. I just had a few things real quickly going through here. Finding number 5, I know there's no update, but just for our benefit, what type of data is referenced in the phrase without accurate and accessible data?
I would have to go back to this report. I'm sorry, this is a report that we did back in 2023. But as I recall, there was not appropriate data to be able to understand the lease statuses of leases, the terms that are in leases. It was not all consistent across city departments. But if you give me a minute, I can open up that report and find the details.
take the answer offline.
All right, so this report, if you'd like an answer, this report was from February 2023. It is available on the Audit Committee website, and the finding states that the system environment has created a lack of accurate and accessible data, and so things that aren't currently being tracked are things like the rent per square foot per month, market vacancy, cost per square foot, operations and maintenance costs, diversity of revenue sources, special event attendance, sort of a broad area. And I stand corrected that this is only about the airport. It's not citywide, although the hope is that this data can be leveraged citywide. So the goal would be in the new system to track more data to be able to make data-driven decisions.
Okay, all right, and then same page, finding number 10, there's the phrase that the airport lacks a comprehensive operating plan. Does that go away in 2028 when the airport closes? I'm assuming it does.
Yes, theoretically, yeah.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna go to the next page. I'm just curious, what, for capital asset internal controls testing, what happens next? It felt like there should be, like, what should we see prior to the May meeting, or what do you think this might look like?
I think that question might be more appropriate for us.
So it would be the implementation of an asset management system. And they're working towards that. They just haven't put any progress on that.
Okay, so we'll have an update come May.
We'll have an update. And then, so we're doing these reports in a different way that I'm submitting the reports to you now, and we're gonna submit them earlier, but you can then tell me if you have questions, and then we'll have the experts be here to answer any questions specifically. So if you wanted to have someone here present from this business unit, you could definitely do that.
Would that, can I ask a question to the group?
Sure.
Okay, sure. Would that be useful, given that this is so important, would it be useful to have ample discussion about tracking capital spending?
I think that's gonna come to us.
Okay. Okay, all right. Just a question on IT, it's really the same question. Should we expect an update for finding number 1 for the next meeting? So it looks like finding number 1 and finding number 7 are both due to be complete by the end of May.
Yeah, and so they are in progress of developing the governance plan for this for the IT spend as well as the assets. And so that plan is in the works, and Moss Adams actually is helping us with that project.
Okay. And I just had the same question on HR. HR is a few pages ahead. But is there going to be an update? It looks like there's a whole lot of stuff that has no update. So
Yeah, this quarter they didn't focus on here. They had other priorities they focused on, but definitely they'll provide updates on the next one.
okay. And I'm on the permit efficiency study. Let me try to get a image reference there. 47 of 72. Okay, I had a few questions here. What is the status of the 18-month plan? That's referenced under finding number 4 towards the top. Is that something we could get an update on maybe at the next meeting?
For sure. You're saying finding 4 on the permit efficiency study?
Right, that's correct.
Okay. We can give you an update.
Okay. And then what happens to all of the findings at the bottom of the page, which is 1, 3B, 5C, 5B, 6, 7, 8B, and 8C? Are they going to be tackled in time, or are these?
They will. So that's the reason why we put them here, to show you that there's still a lot of items that are open, and we're going to continue to work through them. In the appendix, we give you a full inventory of all the items that have been closed, that are in progress, and that had no status in this quarter. But those will remain on the list until we tackle them all.
And is there a time frame for these?
We don't have a time frame, but we will continue to move towards them as we continue to do our work as well, our day-to-day work. And so at the same time, we're tackling these, but if there's one specific that you want an update on, we can definitely get back to you.
Yeah, this is just an area, particularly permitting, maybe it's because of the field I work in where I'm getting a lot of feedback, some of which is probably not accurate, but just a lot of frustration with the whole process.
Okay, so would you like someone to be here in the next meeting to give you some updates?
Yeah, I think if they could just give us an update on where these.
Permit division, the permit,
Yeah.
specific to the permit efficiency stuff? For sure.
Are there any other questions? No. Okay, then, can I get a motion to receive and file?
So moved.
Second.
Voice vote, all in favor?
I'm sorry,
Aye.
was that, I'm sorry, was that push?
Yes. All opposed? None opposed, passes unanimously. The next item, was in your packet. And it was the city's responses to the Moss Adams, with the questions I submitted on the Moss Adams capital study, capital, internal controls process review. And so,
I'm sorry, Chair Verbo, can I read the actual item to the record before we proceed?
okay, sure.
Item 6C, Annual Comprehensive Financial Report.
Yes, we made a motion to file and accept, and then,
That was on the internal audit, we're in 6C now.
oh, okay, 6C. I got a staff, I thought we just went through the staff presentation on that item. Annual comprehensive,
You
That's,
only
that's
had
what
two
we,
votes.
that's what we, yeah, we just went through that.
we just
That
went
was
through
Ryan's
that.
presentation.
Yes,
Well, did you combine them then? Because we did the 2024 financial audit update, then we moved to the internal control, internal audit status report.
I think what's happened is that 6A and 6C, were discussed and basically, dealt with simultaneously.
Gotcha.
Would you say the same for 6B and 6D?
No, the 6B was the,
6B was Colleen's progress on the projects, cash handling. But Jeff, you also talked about the status report.
Okay,
So
so,
you kind of talked about both.
okay, so we did do 6B and D together.
Yeah.
and there were no other questions on the, findings and observations, other rules.
Wait, okay,
Point of
so,
order, sorry, do we need to make a separate motion then to receive and file the annual comprehensive financial
You
report?
know what, let's clean this up.
Yes.
So let's make a separate motion on each one of these clean, so we don't have to rely on the omnibus motion that we made earlier.
Alright, so I'll move to reconsider all motions regarding agenda item 6 at this time.
I'll second that.
voice vote?
Aye.
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 All opposed? None opposed. That passes. So all items 6 have been received and filed. Okay,
We don't
No,
have to
no,
revote
we
it.
need to do a separate motion to receive and file. So,
For each one, so we-
So we're doing them all right now.
yes, so I move to receive and file all agenda item 6.
Second.
let's back up a second. When you say all of item 6, you're talking about 6A, B, C,
6A, B, C,
That's
and
what,
D.
that's what I thought we just voted on.
We had to reconsider the previous motions for 6A and 6B, and now we're doing all 6
Got it.
together. Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so it's a procedure. It was Hall and Verville, but, is it Hall and Verville?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We can go voice vote, all those in favor.
Aye.
So now we're on item 2, correct?
On item
Audit
7,
Member discussion items?
we were on item 7. If my count
Oh, I'm
is
sorry, I think my count went off. So are we on audit subcommittee member discussion items?
correct.
Okay. Okay, so let me read it to the record. Item 7A, Chair Groville's questions on capital program study report and city's responses posted online.
Okay, that was a long road to get to 7A. So I would like to propose all these questions came from the Moss Adams capital program best practices and effectiveness assessment that was presented on November 19th of last year. That Moss Adams study, I view that as a seminal study. I look at the amount of money that we're looking at. In that meeting, our former city manager, David White, noted that the size of the unfunded capital backlog was warranting a discussion about perhaps floating a ballot initiative to address some or all of it. It's almost $500 million. It's about 460 million, although the report here says 450 million. And so the Moss Adams study went through in quite detail on how that capital spend is being managed. For example, Moss Adams asked for progress reports of the city to go through the projects. The city couldn't provide any reports. The last report that was issued by the city on capital was issued in 2018. So, given the materiality of the current spend and the upcoming spend, I think it's really important for the new audit subcommittee members to get up to speed on this and be fully informed as you go forward in your deliberations as to how you're gonna pay for this, what you're gonna be choosing to do. So, looking at these questions and answers in isolation, I think is a very difficult thing for all of the new members of the audit subcommittee. So what I would like to propose is that we move this item to the next meeting. And in the meantime, the new members of the audit subcommittee can review the Moss Adams report. Perhaps, and I'd like to invite Moss Adams back in the next meeting to answer any questions of the new members. And then we can consider this and then basically put this issue to bed. But I think that the materiality and the issues raised in that report deserve, I think, separate consideration by the new members, just to make sure that as you guys move forward in your new terms, you're fully informed as to what's going on. So with that, I would like to make a motion that this item be moved to the next meeting, but inviting Moss Adams to also participate and field any questions that this committee may have on their November 19th. Well, that may not have been the actual date of the report, but on the report that was presented in the November 19th, 2024 Audit Subcommittee meeting on the capital program best practices and effectiveness assessment. So,
Mark, may I ask a question first?
Sure.
Before we go on your motion?
Sure.
So this question references this document 3 separate places, but just one question / comment. It's 4A. It's also 3A1, it looks like, in one other location. But in the last meeting, and I know that some of the current committee members were not at the last meeting, we were shown a long list of deferred capital projects, or projects that hadn't been undertaken because it just simply wasn't sufficient capital. And there was discussion that some of these items were very important because if we didn't move forward with them, equipment would start breaking down. But other things like a dog park at a certain location may not be prevalent now because that was put on the list in 2014. So what I was also hoping to do is have a better understanding of what do we do with this list. Specifically, how do we prioritize what's really important And as noted in a couple of these questions, what is the wish list? And who is it that does that prioritization? That was my comment.
I think if you look at the list, you can I actually summarize it for myself. You've got infrastructure maintenance, which is basically 41% of the 460 million. You've got new infrastructure, which is another 41%. I'm sorry, it's 30%. The infrastructure maintenance is 30%. New infrastructure is 14%. Parks is 44%. So I think that information is already there. I mean, Oscar could possibly summarize it, but I think what I'm focused on are the findings of the Moss Adams report as relates to how the spend, regardless, because stepping back, and I don't know if everyone's aware of it, all of the capital projects go through one department, which is Public Works, right? So everything gets found in Public Works. Public Works does all of the reporting, or as Moss Adams find out, they're not doing any reporting. They're doing all the spend management. They're doing, and since there's no reporting, we don't know if there's overspends, underspends, how that money is being managed. So I think we discussed in the last meeting prioritizing these spends in the publication of the unfunded capitals list, so that the public and the council has a better idea as to what is hot and burning and what is something that can be safely deferred without any kind of consequences. So, but when we're talking about the internal controls and the way the money is managed, it applies to any project, right? And so that's what I want to focus on in the next meeting. And then the council can decide how they want to prioritize, how they can work with Oscar and figure out, how that looks. And Oscar could possibly provide a pro forma as to how he thinks it would be how these things, and I can send you, Oscar, this, in fact, I can give you this list and you can use it as a template if you like. But I think in the next meeting, it's about how that money is being managed, because right now, nobody knows if there's an overspend on one. We don't know if Public Works is taking money from another project and just saying, well, we'll cover it with this, and then that just basically gets delayed, and then all of a sudden, because for council, the only thing you guys see is a request from staff saying, we need some additional funding, and the money is gonna come from these accounts. And they ask you to approve that. But there's never any context in the staff reports that say, this is where, and this was a conversation in a prior audit subcommittee meeting. And people were kind of lukewarm about it. Actually, they weren't. That was a separate discussion. There was a motion passed in a prior audit subcommittee meeting that recommended to council that they ask staff in these projects to include a summary for council's consideration whenever they're asking for money or whenever they're talking about the project, and say, this is the financial status of the project. This is the approved budget that the council approved, spend to date, estimated spend to complete, and where we think the project is going to end up against the original budget. So this way, when the council is looking at approving additional funding or negotiating a contract, they can understand where that project stands. Because if the project all of a sudden is over budget, the council can turn around and say, well, wait a minute, maybe we need to talk about that first before we talk about allocating more money. But right now, there's no reports coming out of Public Works. So that was the aha finding that came out of the Moss Adams thing. So what I'd like to do is, that's why I think it's important that we move this item to the next meeting and we have a full consideration of that Moss Adams report, have Colleen or whoever she would like to come in and answer any questions, and then my questions and the answers to these questions are going to make a lot more sense. So that's kind of where my mind is at on this.
See if anybody else has a comment before I make a comment.
Any questions, comments?
No, I think you make a very good observation. I don't see any problem with moving forward, just so we can have an idea as to what the individual, where we are with respect to using these capital items.
And I think, you know, maybe, how would they get the report? Would you then email them the report? Because, I mean, they should.
Findings?
Yeah, well, that whole report, I mean, at the end of the
Yeah,
day, we don't have to wait until the agenda for the next meeting, it's already been
It's
published.
posted online, posted online.
Yeah, I already got it. And
Okay.
it's on,
On the website.
it's on the audit subcommittee's website, so
Okay.
all of the reports are up there. I'm a fan of the website.
No, I just wanna make sure, everyone is aware, right? And
Thank you, Chair.
so, yes.
Go ahead. Did you want
Are there any, for Director Santiago, are there any staff considerations with regards to like bandwidth and emphasis like your busy season around?
I'm sorry,
Are there any considerations that maybe we might not be aware of, given your department's bandwidth over the
No,
next quarter?
we definitely can ask Moss Adams to come speak to the report and answer any questions. We've already answered a lot of the questions here in the document, so our public works department will come in and just clarify the answer. So, yeah, we can definitely do that. As long as we know ahead of time that you want to see,
Right.
we can do that.
So Chair, do we need a motion to move this item to the next meeting?
I would like to move this item to the next meeting, and then, have a Moss Adams representative and a Public Works representative available to answer our questions.
So I move the item, I make a motion to move the capital program item, continue to our next, meeting.
I'll second that. We have a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? None opposed? It passes unanimously.
Item 7B, request for staff to provide status at May 2025 meeting on data and an update on call processing times and on the implementation of the text message system and the coverage of calls. This falls related to joint dispatch efficiency study presented on August 20, 2024.
And I think that is
I just wanted,
an item from Commissioner.
yeah, and that one, I think is less urgent than the capital study. I also wanted to make, oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to make one comment on the motion just passed, which I fully support. But to me, the priorities are important because when I go out and talk within the community, people are pointing to numbers about the massive number of projects, of capital projects that have been deferred. And I don't think there's a general understanding that not all capital projects are equal. Some are more or less important. And that's why I want to make sure when we tackle this issue that we also add some transparency to the level of importance or the urgency of some of the projects that are on this list.
So I think the discussion for this committee, it's about the reports and the findings. The prioritization, it's up to council when we develop the capital program budget. At that point, council receives all the projects, also receives information about what projects we're recommending to be funded, and then council gives direction on moving projects or anything.
That's my understanding. Thank you. So on this item, Commissioner Bush, is this something that you want to move to a future meeting?
Well, I know that the people involved in doing that presentation are dealing with numerous challenges
Correct.
related to things that happened in January. So if we have to, we can move it to the next meeting. I'm not feeling that it's imperative to do that.
Okay, so can we put, I'm trying to think of how to get a motion that says that we can consider it in May, but it may again get moved out into a future meeting.
You can just say you're, continuing it to a meeting to be determined later.
That's perfect. So,
You want to make the motion?
I'll move to continue item 7B at staff's discretion to bring back.
I'll second that.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, And with that, it is 7:54, and I call this meeting adjourned.
I'll take that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was fun.